Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gray Matter. Well, today is going to be another in a series of programs that we have been presenting about what is going on in Western Canada, particularly in Alberta. Some of you might realize that according to recent polling, for the first time ever, the concept of independence or separation from Canada is more popular in Alberta than it is in Quebec. Just drink that in for a moment. The cause of this, well, there are many causes. The sort of blanket term that people use is Western alienation. So that's a beginning of the discussion, but it doesn't really answer the problem. Today we have on a guest who is going to be able to explain to us and to expand upon some of the reasons why Western alienation is so prevalent right now in our country. Of course, in Alberta, the most topical thing in the news is the UCP leadership race, which is going to determine, at least temporarily, the next premier of our province. And that race has actually drawn national attention. Most recently, when our very confused Lieutenant Governor decided that she was going to interpret the Constitution and ignore centuries of constitutional convention in Canada by refusing to sign a democratically passed bill, namely the Sovereignty Act. So we've had on our program, as you know, Danielle Smith, who is one of the front runners for the UCP leadership. Brian Jean has also been with us and talked about his campaign. We've also had on the program several guests from the Alberta Prosperity Project. Dr. Modry, Jeff Rath has been with us twice, Michael Wagner, Dr. Roger Hodkinson, and of course, the inimitable Chris Scott. Well, today we have on the program somebody who has been involved in Alberta politics on the front lines and behind the scenes for quite a while, but it's also been very, very important and a rising figure in this independence movement, if we can call it that. And he's involved with something called the Independence Party, which is a provincial party, which will be presenting candidates in the next provincial election in Alberta, which we expect will happen sometime in the spring of next year. His name is Bob Blayone, and he ties together a number of these topics that I've been mentioning, both Western alienation, of course, independence. And as we'll find out, he's also been someone who was involved with the APP. So Bob is going to tell us some more about his party, the party that he's involved with, that I believe he helped to found, and so that we'll gain a better understanding. Because of course, the UCP and the Sovereignty Act, that's one answer to the problem of Western alienation, but the Independence Party has a different one, and it's tied into many of these different themes that we've been talking about on the program. So before we go there, of course, we're going to start with our quotations board. The first one is from Epictetus, who's a figure from ancient Greece, who once wrote, "You cannot hope to progress in areas where you have taken no action." Next one is from Frederick Douglass, who of course is a very important historical figure in the civil rights and the emancipation movement in the United States. He once wrote that a man's rights rest in three boxes: the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. Finally, from Aesop, who is famous for his fables that many of us learned as children, and many of us know, even though we don't think we know them, once wrote, "We hang the petty thieves and appoint the great ones to public office." So who do we have on the program today? Well, we have Mr. Bob Blayone. Bob is a husband of 30 years to his wife, Dana, who I've had the pleasure of meeting, a father of two, brother, uncle, and friend to many. He is a proud Albertan of diverse ancestry. I should say that we're using diverse there, not in the diversity, inclusion, equity sense, diverse in its proper sense. Diverse ancestry, a proud Metis with ancestral roots that run deep. His great-grandfather was Chief Black Powder, who was a strong leader of his time and a man who understood all too well the loss of freedom. Coming from humble beginnings, Bob was taught the value of hard work and determination, that he was responsible for his own destiny through hard work, determination, and being blessed with opportunity. Bob lifted himself up and found prosperity. In peace and comfort, he was able to enjoy his life relatively free. However, he realized that for far too long, while Albertans have been raising families and living their lives, self-serving politicians and unelected bureaucrats have taken advantage of the people whom they are meant to serve. As self-serving elites rule over the people with heavy hands, shackling our children with debt and shutting down opportunities, a fire burns within Mr. Blayone. He longs to see those stolen opportunities and freedoms return to all the people of Alberta so that future generations to come may also enjoy their right to freedom and prosperity. Bob wishes to see Albertans standing in unity, creating a political grassroots movement of the people without self-serving politicians at their table, and being confident in knowing that together they have the power, we have the power, to effect change, to flip over the table, to take back our freedom and prosperity through becoming an independent and sovereign nation of Alberta. So, Bob, welcome to Grey Matter. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Leighton. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so Bob, we were just saying off camera, Bob, like myself, is a resident of Northern Alberta. He's joining us from Peace River. I'm in Cold Lake, so we have that sort of Northern Alberta connection and a rural connection, which I think is very important to some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. Before we get going into the Independence Party, and Bob is going to be able to tell us a lot more about that, I want to touch on a couple of things. The first thing is, Bob is someone who has done a great deal of research on the World Economic Forum and how it has been adopted, or how it has sort of infiltrated or infected Alberta politics. And I think this is very important as a sort of setting up our discussion about the Independence Party, why it's necessary, why independence for Alberta is really mandatory. It's inexorable. It must be achieved in order to avert a particular disaster. Bob, I know you've done a lot of research on this. Would you mind sort of taking us back to the beginning and talk about the World Economic Forum as you understand it, and how it became part of Alberta politics to the point where Alberta Health Services has signed on to it, and Alberta Treasury branches are a partner in the World Economic Forum. Would you mind talking about that for us, just to set up our conversation about the party?
Absolutely, Leighton. So, it was shocking for me to find out who was responsible for this, or particularly what politicians were. Like many of us in rural Alberta, I've been a staunch conservative most of my life, or all my life. But to be honest with you, this has shattered the illusion for me of the left and right politics. So it goes back to 2007 when Stephen Harper introduced the World Health Organization International Health Regulations. Regulations is a key word in that, not guidelines. And in 2008, Alberta Health Services was set up. And then in 2009, Harper brought in the Sustainable Development Act, which is, the Sustainable Development Goals as a metric of the United Nations Agenda 2030. And then 2015, I remembered when this happened, being in oil and gas myself, being passionate about those opportunities. When Harper signed us on to the Paris Climate Accord, I didn't take him to be serious in that, and which was a mistake. So that was the beginning. And, like you said, Leighton, this partnership with AHS and the WHO even, and the WEF. So the WHO, I had a interaction with the former Minister of Health, Tyler Shandro, regarding this point. And when they amended Bill 10, the COVID-19 Emergencies Measures Act, to Bill 24, there's a line in that bill that stated COVID-19 guidelines, World Health Organization COVID-19 guidelines and determinations. There is, in fact, a partnership with this agenda, and it was introduced to Canada by Stephen Harper. And Mr. Harper was sending many ministers to the World Economic Forum Summit in Davos, and they weren't there just to observe, they were leading committees there. John Baird being one of them. John Baird is Pierre Poilievre's co-chair of his campaign team. Joe Oliver is another one, and I'll get into this later, but Joe Oliver sits on multiple boards, lobby organizations, a business interest of a certain lobbyist in the business of carbon capture, which is a heavily subsidized, taxpayer-funded industry, they call it, and it's 70% of these carbon capture projects are funded by the taxpayer. And I see a spider web, I'll call it, with this. And just yesterday, I asked myself yesterday, who holds a patent on some of this carbon capture technology? Well, there's a patent that was taken out in the US, and it's a Calgary company, in fact, that took out the patent. And lo and behold, there's connections there to individuals like Bill Gates and Murray Edwards, surprisingly, of CNRL, which is very concerning. And Murray Edwards sits on a major lobby organization, the Alberta Enterprise Group, which he helped to fund. I'm going to ruffle some feathers in this conversation, Leighton, but it needs to happen. And Alberta Enterprise Group or the Wellington Advocacy are another one of really powerful lobby organizations. And that's an example right there. So you got the Alberta Enterprise Group that has Wellington Advocacy lobby organization on there as a member also. So you got a lobby organization in a lobby organization. And these individuals are playing with some of these mechanisms of this agenda, carbon capture being one of them. And there's $31.25 billion of taxpayer-funded subsidies funding these initiatives in Alberta. And I got great concern there, and I'll get into more detail later on regarding this and who are some of these lobbyists behind our politicians in Alberta, and Daniel Smith being one of them. I'm more than happy to share this information out far and wide, and these meetings that have been taking place with individuals in Alberta, that these, individuals don't want to change anything. They don't want to see a restructuring of our governance structure. They don't want to see accountability brought back in. Why? Because they have too much to lose. There's so much corruption going on behind the scenes. Even before I left the UCP, I was involved in the North here, very involved. And I was calling out the theft of our tax dollars. And then COVID began. And, that's when I walked away from the UCP, just the heavy-handedness of these politicians and unelected bureaucrats, how disrespectful they're being to my friends and neighbors and my family. I took exception to, and I still do. And that conversation, as you know, Leighton, still needs to happen. We need to finish that conversation. I see these UCP leadership candidates cowardly shying away from that conversation. As you know, there was a meeting on November 10th with 10 Alberta MLAs, Todd Lowen being one of them. And Todd is where I learned of Wellington advocacy. And the conversations I have behind the scenes are shocking to me, that these individuals outright say it. Todd said it in his leadership campaign kickoff, that no matter who wins the UCP leadership election, Jason Kenney and Stephen Harper will be behind the scenes pulling the strings. That is concerning. And knowing all this information of who brought this agenda to Alberta, knowing that organizations like Wellington Advocacy, all inner circle operatives of Kenney and Harper, are lobbying on behalf of a World Economic Forum affiliated organization in Forte, that a World Economic Forum global shaper, Nat Ware, has been in our legislature, that, as you say, the ATP, the Alberta Treasury Branch, a Crown corporation, has partnered with the Liberal government in introducing digital IDs to Canadians. It is an absolute alignment. And then in the last year that the UCP government worked with the Trudeau government on bringing in that $30 billion of taxpayer-funded debt to fund carbon capture, something that these industries would not do themselves had to pay for it themselves. This delusion of fighting climate change, it's something that I weighed into about 5 years ago, and I reached out to a climate scientist named Mike Hume, who was with the IPCC, and Mike walked away when they introduced carbon taxes. He's seen the fallacy of that and the corruption in that. And here we have our own politicians playing that game and leading us down this path rather than defending our opportunities, defending our resource production that lifts people up, that lifts First Nation peoples up, all of us that we need. Sorry, I get very passionate about this. I've had so many discussions in the last 2.5 years of people that have been either hurt badly by the COVID debacle, and now this climate change agenda. I've seen it being ramped up. And our politicians and our future premiers are playing along with it. And they're being lobbied by these individuals that have done a 180, that used to be like I was, that fought against this illusion of fighting climate change, and now flipped right over to this wokeism of going along with it. And that path is going to lead to a very painful time in our history if we don't take action now and start pushing back on this. And I see no hope whatsoever in working with our betrayers to find a solution in this. And that's why, when I was so glad, like you were, Leighton, to be at the Freedom Awards, the Justice Center Freedom Awards, and to hear Mr. Brian Peckford in his speech, his very powerful speech, when he lambasted all political parties across Canada, all politicians, the justice system, the politicalization of it, the politicalization of the media, how they're no longer reporting the truth. And he said it out loud, that the lobbyists are controlling our politicians. And the only hope we have is in the people to rise up and take it back themselves. That's where we're at. So I refuse to work with 20-year political operatives whose job is to save the very political structure that is doing this to us, that is betraying us badly. I've been working very hard of trying to, share this information out and say, even with my friend and mentor, Dennis Modre, right? We're at odds with this. We cannot work with these betrayers and to trust them that they're going to flip the table over and do what needs to be done. That's not going to happen. I've been poo-pooed in meetings in the last 2 years where I made the suggestion that, in my opinion, it's not just about a referendum on independence. We need accountability reinstalled back in our governance structures. One of my policies came to fruition in the UCP was free vote. And I had meetings with Jason Kenney and his former chief of staff, Jamie Huckabee, on this, where I felt very strong, like all of us do, that are MLAs, that are locally elected representatives, that stand in the Alberta Legislative Assembly, that should be there in our, representing us. And it reads specifically on matters of moral conscience that I believe that. But being naive to politics at the time, and especially policies, Jason Kenney decided when it was enacted. And the last face-to-face conversation I had with my MLA, Mr. Dan Williams, who took exception to when I resigned off the local UCP board up here. And he said to me, "I'm the captain, you're the forward." And I was laughing at him, and he didn't like that. But I mean, that's the arrogance we have here today with these politicians. The absolute arrogance. And I corrected him. I said, no, you're wrong, young man. All of us around that table, that local table, are captains of our community. We care about our family, friends, and neighbors. You work for us. And in anger, he said to me, "And by the way, no one in the UCP caucus supports your concept of free vote." Of course they don't. Of course they don't, Leighton. They are trained politicians. They are given this cue card with these big omnibus bills. Here, read this. Rubber stamp this, right? Unless you're part of that inner circle of power, you are powerless. And so are the people. So that's my driving me. Like, I learned a lot in my short time with the UCP. I had inside access because Mr. Williams was a 6-year staffer under Kenney. It was Mr. Williams that told me that this individual paused his very lucrative private sector career to come back to Alberta to help. That was the former chief of staff, Jamie Huckabee, who is absolutely 100% connected to this global agenda that is playing out. He came from an organization out of New York City as a global lobbying organization. And from 2010 to 2015, he was the vice president of that organization. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was Halloween, October 31st of 2020, when I understood just exactly where Mr. Huckabee came from. Listen to this, the people that was on his board at that organization. The board of directors of the organization is called Gerson Lorman Group. The campaign manager, former campaign manager, Barack Obama, the former Hillary Clinton campaign manager, the former Democrat National Committee chairman, the recently former ambassador to China, the recently former CEO of Pfizer, and this individual, Joseph Stiglitz. This guy he was the lead author of the 1995 IPCC climate assessment and an architect of the Great Reset, the UN Agenda 2030. That's who Mr. Huckabee was rubbing shoulders with.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are. And watching this play out, it is horrifying to me. And again, I say this, what hope is there working with our betrayers and thinking that they're going to, hold themselves accountable? Mm-hmm. That an individual like, I don't know Daniel Smith at all. And this is not an attack on her character whatsoever. This is my opinion of the politics playing out today. Mm-hmm. Mr. Parker, David Parker, also took exception to my pushback on his politics. I'm not attacking their character. I'm attacking their politics and this game, this political theater that they're playing. Mm-hmm. This is bad. I mean, we need to walk away from these people. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead, Leighton.
No, you don't have to apologize. You answered the question. I want to flesh this out a little bit more, though, and I have to tell you, I'm later to the party on Stephen Harper than you are. I'll tell you what raised my concern. I was quite a fan of Stephen Harper, and when he was the prime minister, but I became very concerned about his deafening silence throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns. He was conspicuous by his absence from the political scene, and so I became very curious about this, and so I went and I read his book. And what I discovered, to my horror, is that he was a globalist, that he, in fact, laid the groundwork for the train, the horrific train that has been Trudeau, the Trudeau Liberals, and also he, as you rightly pointed out, he signed on to these these global agreements, these climate agreements. He's a globalist. He's a Trump hater, and really, there's very little about his politics and his ideology that is conservative. In fact, I found it almost incongruous that he was the leader of a party called the Conservative Party of Canada. So leaving that aside, I'm very, very concerned that he broke his silence by endorsing Mr. Poilievre. So obviously, and then I did a bit more research, and I found how deeply Mr. Harper was tied into the World Economic Forum. So this is where I'm coming to my point. I've done some research on the World Economic Forum. I've written both of Klaus Schwab's books. I hesitate to call them books because they're really just hate speech. The Great Reset, as I read it, would distill it down to it's like a song by the Police from their album Synchronicity. The song was called Murder by Numbers. Murder by numbers, 1, 2, 3. It's easy to learn as your ABCs. And what the Great Reset basically advocates is the extermination of 7/8 of the world's population. And all of its economic policy, if you can call it that, economic theory, ideology, is really aimed at fundamentally genocide. So you've done a lot more research on the World Economic Forum than I have. Maybe tell the people who are listening why the World Economic Forum and the Alberta government's partnership with it is so dangerous for us.
Well, they want to restructure our society. This, as you say, it is a culling, as horrifying as that sounds to say out loud, that they want. And they want to shut down our resource opportunities. They want to take away our democracy. They want to have absolute state control. They want to, determine how we live our lives through digital ID and digital currency. Had a small glimpse into that when our nephew visited from Australia. They live in the state of Victoria, and And in the state of Victoria, to participate in society over there, you have to have a digital ID. And you scan the QR code on all public accesses and doorways to get in to have access. And it also tracks all of the purchases of our nephew showed us there. So they want to tell us, you know, what we can do in our day-to-day lives, how much we could eat and drive, and this is an absolute loss of our rights and freedoms and our liberty. Something that you know, some very brave men and women fought and died for over the many years. You know, people that have built this province and this nation would be very, you know, rolling in their graves, as they say, as this is happening to us, and it is unchallenged by the politicians and bureaucrats who are going along with the agenda. So it is a absolute restructuring of our society as life as we know it, to that as state-controlled fascism, whatever you want to call it. It is, we will not have the freedom that we once had. And yeah, it's going to cause a lot of economic pain. This COVID debacle has already shattered many families, mine included. And what's coming at us like a freight train is going to cause a lot more pain.
So it's because of that, you and your wife became very, very active in, let's call it the cause of independence. And so I know that both you and your wife were very much involved early on with the foundation of the APP, Alberta Prosperity Project. As a segue into talking about the Independence Party, would you mind talking a little bit about your involvement with the APP and why you chose to leave the APP formally, having been a very important founding presence there?
Sure, absolutely. I'll just back up a bit. When I walked away from the UCP, that was when my journey really began, and I was searching for something new, and you know, something new and inspiring that could affect change in a meaningful way, because I didn't see any hope in the UCP at that point. So, you know, I just began outreach. Every time I would see a leader stand up throughout this, you know, 2.5 years, whether it was Ty Northcott or Chris Scott, I would thank them. And I was part of the freedom movement and whatnot, and helping, you know, organize big rallies and everything like that. And then it was a draw. It was always the draw to the political vehicle that, you know, pulled me over and over to that, because that's where I saw the best hope. It was great. These I call them, you know, this communities that were being built with these freedom groups was exceptional, and it helped a lot of people at a time in their lives where they felt alone come together. But there wasn't enough teeth to it for me, and so there was 12 of us that found each other, and Dennis Modre was one of them. When I left, I reread my email, a long email that I had written to the UCP, all MLAs and CAs, constituency associations across Alberta. And I spoke of what I had hoped to see in politics, which was accountability, integrity, transparency, honesty, and respect. And I saw none of that. And so that's what accountability to me, Leighton, is really important in life, and in particular in politics. If there's no mechanisms of holding accountable our politicians, then we're done for. And so we there's a group of 12 of us found one another, and I was one that sent the email out. Mark Shayer is one that sent the original email that brought us together. And then I sent out the email where we invited all parties who we would consider holding a referendum on independence. When I reread my email from going away from the UCP, my first paragraph speaks of the concern that the UCP had at the time for the independence movement, and it was new to me. And when I walked away, I had an open mind. I was looking for all solutions. You know, what would get us out of this, and what would get us onto a better path forward. And very quickly, in the mentorship of Dennis Modre, and understanding the power of a referendum, what that could do for us here in Alberta. Until we have that card in our hand, there is no leverage that we could hold to get Ottawa to sit down. And so that really resonated with me very quickly. And so we started, we built the Alberta, sorry, I'll step back. In that meeting in Nisku on May 23rd, 2021, all these parties came to come. They came to the meeting, and they all did the same thing. They stood at the mic and said, "We're the best. You just need to follow me. I'm the best leader." Same old, right? So we walked away thinking, okay, we got to do something different. And then we started the Alberta Unity project, which fell apart due to self-serving purposes. It's something else I see behind the scenes of politics. Money is the root of all evil, and money in politics, that's bad, right? So we pivoted from there. Jeff Rath came along at that time when we walked away and started the Alberta Prosperity Project. And yeah, Dana and I, we've dedicated our life to this, to doing this, and we invested a lot of our own capital into that. And I asked for nothing in return. As I travel, I probably put on at least, 150,000 kilometers in the last year and a bit, traveling Alberta. And my goal is to go to every community and have this conversation, because it is the solution. When you combine it all together with this, what I learned and, working with Dennis and that solution, combined with educating Albertans on this solution, inspiring them, the Alberta Prosperity Project did a very good job. I personally don't feel that they're ever going to be an organization that'll reach that 500,000, a million, because on my going away, when I made the decision to leave Leighton, because I was getting to meetings where I had to be careful, because as the president of the Alberta Prosperity Project, I couldn't speak openly on which party I felt would be the best party that would enact this, that would, be the political vehicle that would bring this to fruition. And so one of my last meetings, a community meeting I had, and it was in Fort Macleod, and with community leaders, and I couldn't speak openly. And then on Thursday, that week, Thursday evening, I had another conversation, and that individual was a community leader in the North. And he said, "Bob, we get it, we love it, we want to adopt that, but whatever you do, don't come back to our community unless you have a political vehicle." So it was the next morning I phoned Dennis. Had I spoke openly, I would have faced personal fines from Elections Alberta, and it would have potentially shut down the Alberta Prosperity Project. So Friday morning, I called Dennis and I said, I got to go. I have to go. And the pull over to that political vehicle was so strong at that point in time, Leighton. I couldn't hold back anymore. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Okay, I understand." And then once I did that, I was able to speak freely. I had a conversation with Elections Alberta on it, and they asked me to send an email, so I get it in email. Now I was unshackled. Mm-hmm. Now I could stand on a stage and say, I support the Alberta Prosperity Project for these reasons as the educational society. And I also support the Independence Party of Alberta because that was the only political organization that welcomed unity, that welcomed re-election of a leader upon unity by membership of the people, that favored the election of a new provincial board of governors. Democracy, right? They were the only ones, and they never hesitated. And so it was an easy decision for me to go over there. Their platform was very closely aligned with ours. They want to, and I say this, and I just got laughed at again on last week by a political operative long time. When I say flip the table over, I mean flip the table over. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And this organization was a grassroots, just regular Albertans from all walks of life. When I say regular Albertans, that includes all walks of life, all demographics. Mm-hmm. None of them had this elitist mindset of we need to, do the same old, same old. We need to do something different. We need to respect and honor the voice of membership, which is the voice of the people. We will conduct ourselves and hold ourselves accountable without mercy. And to be that model. And that's what I was hoping, with the Alberta Prosperity Project, that was supposed to be the example of the governance structure of this new idea. When we built the Alberta Prosperity Project, the concept was very simple. We would shop it around. We would shop it around to all the parties and say, it's yours, take it, it's yours. I had outreach from Saskatchewan when I was the president. I had outreach from BC. I had outreach from Nova Scotia. And the question was, can we adopt that idea? Absolutely. It was intended to be our gift to all Canadians. And we hope in Alberta to be the leaders in this solution of uniting as people, as electing ourselves in a political organization of the people, electing ourselves with the majority, instantly bringing back accountability, where we could ourselves open up everything and have a look, where we could enact any mechanism at hand to give us more leverage, to give us more power. That's what this is. It's this very simple concept when you break it down. Why should we trust the same politicians to hold our hand and say, just trust us one more time? Come and help us rebuild our political organization, and we promise you, we will stand with you this time. No. I can't forgive my friends in the UCP. I can't forgive Todd Leighton. I can't forgive him because his disservice to Albertans is perpetual until he proves to me with his actions, hard-hitting actions. And I use Todd, my friend, as an example because he's considered to be, the guy that stood up and he did some things that I respect, but there's so much more he could do. So much.
So this is that's a nice setup then to our discussion of the Independence Party. And Bob, you correct me if this is wrong, but it's important. I think there's much in words, the meaning, and so the party's not called the Separatist Party. This is not a Quebec separatist movement. Okay, this is not a Parti Québécois. The Independence Party is born out of a necessity, and part of its mission includes this idea that Alberta independence could be the salvation for Canadians. So, and this is kind of a subtle distinction, but I think it's an important one. As I see the APP and the Independence Party, these independence movements, it's not about getting away from the rest of Canada. It's about escaping the overreach of this oppressive, evil federal government. So, and this is very clear from the mission statement, and this is off of the Independence Party website for those who want to go and read it. I encourage you to do so. It reads, our mission: the people of Alberta, after being forced into the Canadian Confederation without their consent, have attempted since 1905 to gain a fair deal in Confederation without success. Therefore, it is necessary that the Independence Party of Alberta be established to end the cycle of injustice. I've jokingly called this abused province syndrome. The Independence Party of Alberta is committed to separating from Canada and creating a sovereign nation without exception. So it uses the language as separation, but the mission is very clear that this is a quest that's born out of necessity, not a desire to escape from Canada, for some cultural or other purpose to setting up a distinct society, although Alberta might be. And then there's a list of some of these founding principles. Would you mind talking about those a little bit, Bob? Some of the founding principles of the party, just so people have a clear understanding about what the Independence Party is all about.
Well, I'll go back first, Leighton, and again, I want to make sure it's very clear that the referendum on independence is number one.
Right.
And what happens after that is something that we don't know. That's, we don't know until that moment in time. So I know a lot of people are scared about the separation conversation, and I get it all the time. And I say it like this: I love Canada. I always will love Canada. I have friends and family across this nation, and I just wish to see, Alberta was the economic engine of this country, and it is when our opportunities are getting shut down. Those opportunities are across Canada, that we've had for many decades, people coming from across Canada to come to Alberta to work and raise a family and start a business up. And that we're missing that, and we need to rebuild that. So and it's the referendum on independence that is the only thing that'll bring back the ability to bring Ottawa to the table in good faith negotiations. Honestly, we just got to open up the Constitution. That's what our goal is, to open up the Constitution and solve all these deficiencies, the regulatory issues, the electoral reform. I mean, we have a very, very major imbalance in that. and we should have the right, our constitutional right, to produce our own resources. And even the implementation of the carbon tax was unconstitutional in our opinion. That it was, it should have been up to Albertans themselves, not up to the federal government to do that. So our founding principle is just, to defend ourselves. I guess I'm just going to pull them up here.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll pitch these to you, and you tell me. It says,
Sure.
number one is we believe that the government must serve the people of Alberta in both word and deed. That's a foundational one. That's getting back to the rule of law, right? You talk about that. Number two is we believe that Alberta must appropriate all federal powers unilaterally, if necessary, leading up to the formation of a new Alberta national government. That's obviously to prevent this this government overreach, which only today I was reading is continuing, with the federal government is now once again ramping up the threat of COVID restrictions. And it seems pretty clear the federal government has an agenda that they're going to impose on all Canadians, that we're going to have to go and get these vaccinations every 3 months or else. And of course, that's a usurpation of one of the constitutional powers that is exclusive to the provinces, and that's healthcare. And the government of Canada has usurped this. It's usurped the authority over energy and natural resources through the climate agenda, and and through the courts, the control over energy has basically been ceded to the federal government through this climate agenda and the environmental. I'm going to call it a hoax, because that's what it is. There really isn't any hard science to support the idea that that human beings have a significant impact upon climate, and the evidence that carbon is the perpetrator of that, or the cause of that, is even less convincing. I would say almost to the point of being non-existent. It's almost by any scientific measure, it's a complete fallacy, and some of the top scientists in the world have said so. So number two seems pretty clear. Number three, we believe in the individual rights and freedoms of all Albertans at no expense of anyone's individual rights and freedoms. Well, you had me at hello there. Do you want to talk about that one a little bit? That's aiming directly at, for example, not just COVID, but all the restrictions that came about because of COVID, right?
Absolutely. I mean, our individual rights and freedoms, and to live and let live. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life, and you don't tell me how to live my life. Don't force a vaccine on me. Don't tell me how to raise my kids. Don't tell me what to teach them. Don't tell me what to believe, what God to believe in. That's my individual rights and freedoms. And we need to get back to a moment in time when that is honored. And it's certainly to have politicians and unelected bureaucrats dictate to us what we are going to believe and how we're going to live is absolutely offensive. And it's, again, independence, it starts as an individual. It's my choices.
So, of course, number four is a reinforcement of the importance of the rule of law. You've talked about that, everyone being equal before the law. And we believe in the rights of individuals to own and defend property. Recently, as you know, the federal injustice minister, David Metis, recently hinted strongly that, in fact, private property is not guaranteed under Canadian law. That was news to me, as a lawyer who's practiced in Canada for just about 30 years. But it appears that we're going to have to specifically entrench the right to hold private property, and that your party would do that if and when Alberta independence occurs. Also, we believe in a balance between fiscal and social responsibility. Boy, is that ever necessary. One idea that I think is very important that we should be doing on all levels of government is to set spending limits. Because obviously, I think it's obvious that most of the inflation that we're dealing with right now is due to irresponsible spending. Establish an Alberta Constitution. Again, great idea. I've actually been working on that project myself with APP. And it's daunting, but it's exciting. It's a dream job for a lawyer, but it's exciting. Number 8, we are committed to accountable government through to recall elected representatives and to initiate referenda. That's a very that's an interesting one. That's a novel concept. Why is that one important to the Independence Party?
Well, I think given what we've lived through in the last 2.5 years, it's never been a more important time to have the ability to recall our elected representatives. And personally, and a lot of us want to see policies that start at the local CAs, where these, again, having the experience I had on these boards, the political boards, all parties do it. They're all the same. These boards are puppeteered by the politician rather than, the people themselves that sit around that table should have the ability to, call that politician to the table if need be. I'm not saying they need to work together, obviously, but can you imagine if we had a mechanism there for recall or for, certain job descriptions or a annual performance review of these elected representatives, to have the ability to call them to that table and say, you got an opportunity here to take corrective measures on your actions on being disrespectful to your constituents. So we'll give you an opportunity. And then they don't proceed and take corrective action. Then you have the ability to recall them locally. And the metrics that the UCP proposed are untenable. It needs to be a very balanced approach to that. You don't want it too easy where you just, can fire off a recall immediately. It needs to have the will of the people in that region to do that. So, that's important. That's where it starts. If we hold these local politicians accountable locally, we believe all other, corruption in that will fall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is that partially a protection against this sort of party politicking, where you want to hold the representative accountable to their constituents, as opposed to being beholden to a party whip, where we have these. I guess the best example would be in Ottawa right now, where we have this unholy alliance that's propping up the Liberal government between they and the NDP, because all the Liberal backbenchers and all the NDPs, people who may want to support Canadian workers, have to follow Mr. Singh and his agreement, because that's the party line. So part of this is to create more accountability in governance, which is a key feature of the Independence Party, isn't it?
That's exactly, Leighton. So the party whip needs to go. The party whip's job is to, again, that's literally what it means, whip these MLAs into, falling in line with the will of the inner circle of governance of the party. So that needs to go, and the MLAs need free vote on everything, including the budget. That's an argument I heard at the UCP. Oh, we can't do that because we've got to be aligned. Really? And it's a conversation I had with Mr. Kenny the first time we talked. We had about a 45-minute discussion. And I went off on that, and he told me to go for it, and I did. I said, that's obscene to me that you guys, you ruled us from this inner circle of power, and our MLAs or MPs are on the perimeter expecting to rubber stamp your will. That needs to end. And so that's our intention, is to end that. And when these locally elected representatives go to the Alberta legislature, they will represent their regions. Yeah, above all else.
So obviously accountability and governance, that's a key feature. Let's talk a little bit about the separation process, what this would look like. You've talked about the referendum, but the separation process is, as I understand it, I just want to take you through this a little bit. When a majority government is formed by the party, you will immediately pass the Alberta Independence Act. Now, why is that so much different than what Danielle Smith is talking about, her Sovereignty Act?
Yeah, so again, being in a meeting with Rob Anderson, Dennis Modray, and then two of the benefactors of both organizations, Dennis asked the question of Rob right at the beginning of the meeting. Is the purpose of this organization to fix the UCP? Yes. Second question, is the purpose of this organization to trigger a constitutional crisis? Yes. So that's the difference. We believe that first and foremost, so I'll go through the process. On day one, the Independence Act is passed. And that's where we're aligned, creation of our provincial police force, pensions, EI, start doing, trade missions outside of the federal structure, that sort of thing. We're all aligned in that. Where we differ is that we are serious about holding the referendum. That is our commitment within the first year. There's no commitment there in the Sovereignty Act. First, they want to prove to Albertans, okay, we want to show you that Ottawa doesn't want to negotiate in good faith. We already know that. So we believe we need to be very serious in this conversation. Day one, start taking defensive measures and roll out everything we can do with our sovereignty and set the table for the date of a referendum that Ottawa knows it's coming. And we're going to hold that referendum. Now, that's not to say, this is where everybody gets, I guess, the debate starts and the confusion starts. We hold the referendum and it's successful. That's not to say that the next day we're going to declare independence. We got to continue getting ready, establishing our foundation and our framework so we can move to, if need be, to a new nation of Alberta, right?
Mm-hmm.
That needs to be happening. So there's still a process there, and that's where the argument comes out. They're like, well, you can't commit to a referendum because you're not going to be ready. We're going to be ready. We have to be ready, but first and foremost, we need that leverage in hand. Otherwise, Ottawa will not take us seriously.
Mm-hmm.
The suggestion that they're already saying it. Danielle Smith said it out loud. Brian Jean attacked her on being a separatist, and she said it. She wasn't going to hold a referendum. Oh no, I don't mean it. I don't mean it. Done. You're game over.
Mm-hmm.
In going into negotiation, this, Leighton, you got to be firm on your commitment to this solution, this leverage, this power. If you're not, that's not a negotiation.
That's very interesting, Bob, because Danielle Smith was on this program, and those anybody who wants to go back and watch it can. And I put that question to her about the referendum, and she said that she would, if she became premier, she would permit the referendum to occur. So very interesting. Very interesting.
But here's the thing. That's not her decision alone. And the UCP, there's no way in heck, you know it, I know it. There's no way they will have a conversation about a referendum, about independence, period, when they're beholden to the conservative power structure of Canada. Todd Loewen said it out loud. No matter who wins the UCP leadership, Jason Kenney and Stephen Harper will be pulling the strings behind the scenes. So Danielle could say everything she wants about this promise of a referendum. I'm going to go back and I'll send you the article where she rebutted Brian Jean, right? This, again, in my opinion, it's political theater, simply political theater. We mean business, and you have to mean business in order for this to be effective. And, I just want to say one more thing. I get this pushback from political operatives all the time. Oh, Bob, Albertans aren't ready yet. Really? And I bring up the poll from October 2021. When you take out undecided voters, it was at 47% overall. In February of the same year, it was at 25%. In my conversations as I travel around on White Ave last Sunday, I spent an hour and a half talking to Edmontonians about this concept. They are embracing it. It's amazing. APP's done an exceptional job. So I was going to say, even though their memberships are 10,000 right now, the following 500,000. 500,000. That's why when I travel around, and other people are saying it now, Albertans are already hearing about the solution of the referendum on independence.
Right.
And if Danielle Smith, Brian Jean, Todd Loewen, they could be pounding this thing, but they don't.
Well, it's interesting, talking about Danielle Smith's approach. I found Brian Jean's approach even, frankly, more confusing. He was on the program as well, and his catchphrase was autonomy. Well, I understand autonomy to mean literally self-governance, and I have a hard time understanding the distinction intellectually between self-governance and independence. It seems to me, this is Shakespeare, a rose by any other name. But yet he says, well, I'm not for independence, but I am for self-governance. Okay. I'm not quite with you, but here's the thing, and this is my understanding of the distinction between what you're talking about, the Alberta Independence Act and the Sovereignty Act, is that the Alberta Independence Act, unless I'm quite mistaken, is actually provided for under Canadian law. There's a process, you know this very well, under a federal statute called the Clarity Act. And this statute that your party would pass would trigger that. It's contemplated in the Clarity Act. The Clarity Act was provided for by the Supreme Court of Canada in 1998, a reference. And so talking about this constitutional quandary, well, the Alberta Independence Act would not trigger a constitutional crisis. It would be a legal step. In fact, I did some research on this. You're probably aware of this, but Kosovo actually issued its own declaration of independence in the 90s, and Canada was one of the first countries in the world to recognize Kosovo's independence. And so what could be done perfectly legally, in my estimation, in addition to the Alberta Independence Act, is there could be a declaration of Alberta independence, which would signal to the international community of Alberta's intention to be regarded as an independent state. And all of that would be perfectly legal, as opposed to the Sovereignty Act. That's the fundamental issue. That's really the Achilles heel of the Sovereignty Act, is that fundamentally it's unconstitutional and illegal. And it seems to me a poor answer to the federal government's unconstitutional laws for the province of Alberta to answer with its own unconstitutional law. Sort of like what our mothers told us. Remember, Bob, two wrongs don't make a right. I could see the Sovereignty Act being dragged into court before, say, a group of 9 judges in Ottawa, only one of whom is from Alberta. And, what are they going to do with the Sovereignty Act? So that's my concern. And that's why I really think that the concept that your party's onto makes, as a lawyer, it makes a lot more sense to me. The approach that that you're taking, was that part of the? Is my interpretation here? Does that sort of accord with your thinking on it in terms of the distinction between the Sovereignty Act and the, and the act that your party would bring into being upon being elected?
Yeah, you're right on the mark there, Leighton. Exactly. We want to do this in a peaceful, democratic and lawful process, and that's to know that you're going into a constitutional crisis where you're going to lose is nonsensical to us. Why not take the steps that have a far greater chance of success than proposing something that is doomed for failure? As I said to a few people behind the scenes, you're heading down a path is going to be a dead end. Why even go down that path? Why not pivot over to this other means of and mechanisms to have a far greater success? And if we could, that's where so Dennis and I disagreed on this, to suggest that we come together with Take Back Alberta and Free Alberta strategy was no, we can't. We know what the mission is. We know what the solution is. We cannot bend from that. If you bend from that, then you're taking away a percentage of chance that you're going to have success. Mm-hmm. Very simple. Mm-hmm. So no, we got to have.
When I talk at APP events about this, I quote the famous Robert Frost poem, "The Road Not Taken," and that's really this other road, the one that the UCP people are talking about, is really one that we've seen before. We know where it leads, as you say. Mm-hmm. It's a dead end. There's this road not taken, and in the poem it says, "I took the road not taken, and that has made all the difference." And is that road going to be easy? Well, no, because there's a lot of unknowns. But the reality is, independence is something that Albertans have not tried, and I agree with you. There is a growing sense, more than growing, I would say a swelling sense in Alberta, that really this is the only path, that this road not taken, it's the one we've got to follow. And it's so urgent right now with what's happening in the world, not only internationally, but domestically, with this continuing encroachment. Dr. Peterson, recently posted, Jordan Peterson posted something on his YouTube page that said, you know, as bad as the Liberals are, we haven't seen the worst of what they're going to do, and that creates this urgency. If you don't mind, Bob, I've kept you for a while here, but I don't want to let you go just yet, because I really appreciate your website, and again, I encourage people to go visit it, the Independence Party website. But there's a frequently asked questions. I got a few short snappers here. Hoping
Sure.
you can sort of give people a thumbnail sketch of what the Independence Party would look like when it forms a government. So question number one, will we still get our pensions?
Absolutely. Expats get regular pensions no matter where you live in the world. So that's yes. The answer is yes.
And there would be a lot more money for pensions, wouldn't there?
There certainly would. We overfund the pension plan by a substantial amount, and we could either, you know, increase people's pensions or just shore up the actual pension fund, or lower pension contributions.
The number I've heard is we're a net contributor of $3 billion per year. And just imagine, just thinking what we could do for our seniors in this province.
Absolutely.
Especially with, you know, this heinous inflation. Okay, next one. Why haven't separatist parties banded together?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get it almost every day. You know, why aren't you guys uniting with all the independence parties? And again, you know, I'm going to make this request right now, Leighton, with the APP. On their site, there's a line in there that says, unless the independence parties unite, then I'm paraphrasing it, there's no hope.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's talk about that. We all know the Wild Roses situation they're in, and I speak to both the Paul Hinman camp and the Provincial Board of Governors camp. These are good people, right? They're just trying to do something different also, and to create meaningful change. But the reality is they are in a major storm, and they say, right, so to merge with them was untenable. There was a demand leading up to their AGM that we unite with them, which was really foolish, because we all knew what was going to happen there, and it was too bad the way it played out. But can you imagine if we had united with the Wild Rose leading up to that AGM? We would have no vehicle right now. The Alberta Advantage Party are the third, you know, what we consider to be a true independence vehicle, and they have, unfortunately, have in their policy, in their bylaws, that they are not permitted to unite with other political organizations. And to become the leader of that, to run for leadership, you have to be a member for a year and a half. So again, talking to, you know, the leaders of that party, there's a lot of conversations. They came to all the unity summits. We had multiple unity, and it was frustrating for the most part, but it was just untenable. So what is, in my opinion and in our opinion, it is the movement itself that's more important than a certain brand. You know,
Right.
When you get, we need volunteers. We need a lot of Albertans to get involved here, and they're coming to the Independence Party now. They see it as this, you know, viable political organization that is going to be committed to the will of the people, and we're going to respect the people, and we're holding ourselves, you know, in an accountable way, holding ourselves that way. So they're coming, and that was it. And, you know, so there is, and I'll say this humbly, we're it. This is it. This is our opportunity to come together as Albertans behind an organization that has no legacy politicians, no legacy political operatives at our table, that truly want to bring change for our family, friends, and neighbors across this province.
Okay. So we've talked about the referendum on independence. What about having a referendum on concealed carry and the rights of people who want to own firearms? Because that's obviously under very serious attack right now by the federal government.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that's what we're the conversations we're having in regards to referendums. You know, it's not something we should be scared about, and we could have referendums on a lot of issues. Maybe we should have a referendum every year on big topics like firearms or other you know, topics that are divisive. But we need to get back to a moment in time where we have a good conversation, an educational conversation about it, get everybody's sides, you know, have this conversation, and then pose the question to Albertans. Let them answer the question.
And that ties into the whole concept of accountability too, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Yeah.
So next one, how can we afford to secede? This is maybe an easy answer. It's all that black stuff under the ground, right?
How can we afford not to? One common comment we get, and we got it at APP all the time, you guys get it over there, is, well, we're going to be landlocked. Well, unfortunately, we're policy locked right now. And when you talk about opportunities being stolen, Eagle Spirit Pipeline was one that was, or the corridor, energy corridor, was very, very close to my heart. And, I fished out of Prince Rupert for about 30 years now. And it was that pipeline would have made its way to Port Simpson, north of Prince Rupert. All the First Nation communities along this route were signed up to it. In conversations with my friend, he's a local chief, Isaac Labucan. He was involved in that project, and he had closed door meetings with Trudeau and Gerald Butts on that project. And it was a Northern tanker ban that killed that project, and with it stole prosperity from thousands and thousands. And anyways, yeah, sorry, I got sidetracked there. I get emotional about that stuff like that. One of my friends from the community of Fox Lakes asked me there 2 years ago. He said, Bob, when are we going to get our opportunities? And yeah, anyway, sorry, I rambled there.
No, that's, and I'll just say this, a lot of people, I think, both within and especially outside of Alberta, don't understand really this concept of why Alberta is different, why independence, why freedom and prosperity is important, and what our greatest, what our greatest resource is. Our greatest resource isn't oil, it isn't coal, it isn't even agriculture or any of that. It's people. The people. Yeah. We have a culture in Alberta of freedom, of independence, of industry. We're an industrious people. That's part of our culture, and it makes Alberta as distinct, arguably as Quebec's language and history of French culture is. Albertans are different. There are other provinces in Canada that have natural resources, but they haven't developed them, and they haven't done it the way that Alberta has. And that's not to disparage them, but it's just the reality. And I think people, when you ask the question, well, how can we afford to? You're right. How can we afford not to? And really, the wealth of Alberta, I think, are the great people who are here, and of course, independence is going to draw, I think, some of the best people from around the world, from all walks of life and all sorts of disciplines, and so I think that is I think what you have is a great is a great answer. How can we afford not to? How can we afford not to pass up this opportunity? And the only good thing that we can say about our quote unquote friends in Ottawa is that they are the best advertisement for independence, aren't they?
They certainly are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every day they're proving it more and more why we need to seek this conversation, to have this conversation. And yeah, Leighton, what I was trying to say there, this prosperity is so important to all people in Alberta, and this lifting up of people and in all communities. It is only through developing our resources and developing our opportunities that way that'll give people that chance to find the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as they say.
And it's interesting because people talk about the environment. For example, they talk about how the oil industry is a threat to the environment. Actually, all the data shows that until individual people and countries reach a certain level of GDP, they don't care anything about the environment. And this is the interesting thing, and it's such a great, it's such a fortunate thing that even if you accept that there's anything like an environmental crisis, all the data point to the fact that the solution to the environmental crisis, if there exists one, is prosperity. So if we create more wealth, we make people richer. As soon as people rise out of poverty, they tend to start caring more about things like the environment. But here's a big one, Bob, and I know many people are wondering about this. What about healthcare? Under a new independent Alberta, would we still have publicly funded healthcare? What would that look like?
Well, certainly we would. I mean, we'll have components of private as well. There's nothing wrong with opening up some avenues of private and keeping the public access there. It needs to be a more balanced approach. Right now, what is our HS budget is $25 billion, and in discussions with Dennis Moldry, that should be the cost of services that we're getting should only be around 15 billion. So there's room for improvement there. Everybody knows that the healthcare system is broken right now. There should be no waiting lists. It needs to be restructured in a way that's going to create a much better healthcare system for all of us. And now, if you have the means to have the CT or MRI, if you have the means to pay more taxes, is essentially what you're doing in a private system for that, opening up the door for somebody else to get into a public, appointment sooner than later because of that, because you are paying more taxes essentially by doing that. Of course, we got to look at all available options to do things better.
And the dirty little secret that you and I know most people don't realize is that the quote unquote elites are not actually using the public system anyway. They're accessing private services, which is, fundamentally goes against the whole concept of public health care, at least in terms of the opposition to the concept of a private healthcare system. But yeah, that makes total sense. So looking off the website, I want to turn to the last thing I want to talk to you about is this leadership race that's going on right now with your party and the two candidates. But I want to put in this plug. It's from the website. It says, we need your support as we unify this movement to a goal of 1 million Albertans united in our cause for Alberta and a future for our children. We will need not only moral support and volunteer efforts, but also financial support as we talk with Albertans about the issues that are important as we build this movement. We will need polling, surveys, events, rallies. These all cost money. 100% of the financial commitment you make goes to furthering independence, as all members and officers are volunteers. So this sounds great because it's an invitation to Albertans to get involved. And it's great because in talking to Albertans, as I often do, in the communities where they live, they feel shut out of the political process. And so this invitation into the room to get involved and be part of polling and surveys and all and fundraising, this is part of the sort of grassroots movement of the Independence Party as well, isn't it?
Sure is, and it's so important to this movement itself. In my time with the UCP, comparing that level of volunteer, the commitment to volunteers back then compared to now, unbelievable how many people are coming forward. They want to get involved. They want to get engaged. They want to be part of the decision making process, and we want that. I mean, again, we're just expanding as we grow. Our table is expanding and expanding, as it should, with more input from Albertans from across all walks of life. I've been blessed to be on this journey and to see it growing and growing. And like I said, we want people to come to the table and participate in this, and it is the time. If people want to see change, this is it. Come on out and be a part of this movement and build this political organization. That's what we're doing now. That is going to be the future governance structure of our province. And what better way to get involved and be a part of it? And again, with no political operatives and no legacy politicians, there's no dictates going on. You come freely with your own ideas, and we're not going to force you into a box that you don't belong in. You come if you want to or volunteer and whatever you want. That's your choice, right? So yeah, it's an exciting time.
So if people want to get involved with the party, Bob, what's the best way for them to do that?
So they can go on our website and reach out there, sign up for a membership. And we have the events calendar up there, that shows where all the local events are. And they're going to that's going to get filled up. Our calendar by October is going to be full. All across Alberta, we're going to be having events. People have the opportunity to come out and talk to some of us and, meet the new leader. And I just wanted to, if I can, touch on that. We have 2 exceptional people running for the leadership of
Right. This is where I wanted to go next. You want to talk about maybe Archer first?
Well, I'll speak about both of them.
Okay. Well, I wanted to talk about both of them. Maybe I'll just introduce Art. Of course, Archer is a friend of the show. He's been on the show. I know both these people. I had the chance to meet Catherine, and because she was a speaker at an APP event, I believe in June. Archer, the sort of description or the intro to him that's on the party's website is, Archer, as a longtime promoter and defender of civil liberties and a well-known advocate of Canada's poor and homeless, Archer is seeking to become the leader of the Alberta Independence Party. Born in Poland in 1973, he grew up under a communist regime, seeing soldiers with machine guns and tanks on the streets as people rose up in 1981 to fight for their freedoms, a movement that ended communist oppression. So you want to talk a little bit more about Archer, and then we can talk about Catherine?
Yeah, can do. I didn't know Pastor Art until very recently. I didn't get down to the Calgary freedom events that ever, I guess. But what I see in Art is you hear it in me, my distrust for politicians, and his level is even higher because obviously he's been the victim of this terrible tyranny over the last 2.5 years and beyond. The way, but in his attempt to feed the homeless and to hold service and that, he's been it hasn't been good for him. It's been a terrible time of treatment of him and the loss of his freedom and rights, and just trying to help people and what he's experienced and the corruption of these politicians and bureaucrats and doing that. So yeah, he's right there with me and wanting to flip the table over and bring back respect.
Yeah. So, and then we also have Catherine Kowalczyk, and she's lived most of her life in Alberta, with the exception of a 10-year period when she lived in Winnipeg to attend the University of Manitoba and Ottawa for a year, where she was a legislative assistant to a member of Parliament. Catherine is a proud mother and stepmother to 4 children. She's been a lawyer in Alberta since 2003. She's also been a very outspoken advocate about some concerns she has about the judiciary and other issues in the legal profession. Should mention that. And she practices primarily in the area of family law. Between 2010 and 2018, she owned and operated her own law firm. Recently, she and her spouse, Mike, moved to Standard, Alberta from Calgary. And she's previously been on the board of the Calgary Women's Emergency Shelter and provided pro bono, that's free, legal services at the Calgary Women's Centre. So you want to talk about her a little?
Absolutely. And a similar individual where she's also, taken a stand for the innocent victims in this time and beyond. And another lion, I call them both lions. They're fearless in their opposition to this tyranny. Catherine has demonstrated that to me many times, and I was fortunate enough to get to know her, as she was a speaker at APP, and in helping to organize the speakers at the whistle stop on that day. Mr. Chris Scott was arrested. It was the first time I met Catherine, and I saw that, again, just a fearless leader in this time, and a time when we need leadership like that more than ever before. And she is a strong advocate for the rights and freedoms of all people.
I noticed just following the sort of leadership campaign in the news that these 2 candidates have been traveling about around the province and debating. Are there any upcoming leadership debates that I understood that the APP was perhaps involved in organizing an event? They did one for the UCP. I understand they're also going to be doing one for the Independence Party. Is that right?
No, there won't be an in-person debate hosted by the APP. We just ran out of time, and they had a webinar event with both Pastor Art and Catherine on it, so they had a debate via webinar. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately that won't work out, but maybe, who knows, in the future with an event, there could be some collaboration there. We'll see what comes to be when we do the tour across Alberta.
So when will the leader be selected, Bob?
Yeah, so the first off, there on this Thursday in Fort Macleod at 7 p.m. There's the fifth and final leadership debate
Oh,
of
excellent.
the Independence Party, and then on Saturday, this Saturday, September 10th, between Bowden and Innisfail, Range Road 14, the leadership convention will be held, and doors open at noon. Event starts at 1, goes to 3, and then we're going to have a social after. So people are welcome to hang back and just visit with their friends and neighbors. So at that, the convention, the leader will be announced.
And do you have a sense yet how many candidates the party will be running in the next provincial election?
Yeah, our goal is to run all 87. We'll see where it goes. Our first to do is to get all the CAs up and running. And then as we're getting that, we're noticing people are coming forward that are interested in putting their name forward. So our ask of them is to help get the CAs up and running, and then nominations will be held once that happens. So yeah, it's good. I mean, there's in some ridings there's going to be 2 or 3 candidates putting their name forward. There's a couple of the CAs that were already established. We had overwhelming volunteers coming forward helping to get them going. So a lot of people are anxious to get their CAs up and running, and yeah.
All right, very exciting times for the party, and also for the province. So we've kept you quite a while, Bob. I'm very grateful for your time today. We've learned a lot from talking with you. We're at the part of the program that we call the reading list. I understand that the people who take in the show really enjoyed this part. I'm going to go first, and then perhaps you can tell us whether there are any websites or books or anything like that, materials that you think would be useful to people who have been taken in this podcast in terms of advancing their understanding of some of the things you've been talking about today. So the book that I've chosen is by someone who is obviously world famous. I believe has the most popular show on television. His name is Tucker Carlson. He's on Fox News in the United States. The book is called Ship of Fools: How a Selfish Ruling Class is Bringing America to the Brink of Revolution. And in the book, Tucker Carlson offers a blistering critique of our new overlords and answers the all-important question: how do we put the country back on course? And I mentioned this book because it seems to me the same question applies to Alberta. Traditional liberals are gone, he writes. The patchouli-scented hen-ringers who worried about whales and defended free speech have been replaced by globalists who hide their hard-edged economic agenda behind the smokescreen of identity politics. They'll outsource your job while lecturing you about transgender bathrooms. Left and right, Carlson says, are no longer meaningful categories in America, which Bob mentioned earlier. The rift is between those who benefit from the status quo and those who don't. Our leaders are fools, Carlson concludes, unaware that they are captains of a sinking ship. But in the signature and witty style that viewers of the Tucker Carlson Tonight Show enjoy so much, Fools is bulging with big and interesting ideas presented succinctly with wit and precision, each chapter a potential book in itself. And in the book, the reason why I mentioned it, Bob, and why I've chosen this one is because he goes into a lot of detail about how organizations like the World Economic Forum and the UN and Agenda 2030 have really infected the discourse, political discourse in the United States and really globally. And I found in reading this book that many of the issues that Tucker Carlson talked about in his book are also very, very relevant to Alberta. So that's my suggestion for the day. Do you have any that you'd like to share with the people who are taking in the podcast?
Well, I certainly do. Not a particular book, and but in suggesting that people need to shut the legacy media off, number one. And when I want to learn about something, Leighton, we have at our fingertips here the World Wide Web, and I've had the privilege of having conversations and learning from individuals firsthand, like Mike Hume, who I mentioned. Had a 3-year-long conversation with him. There is no excuse for remaining ignorant, and I don't say that in a mean way. There's right at our fingertips. There's all the information in the world, and we need to trust our instincts, our guts, and our hearts and minds when something sounds wrong and it feels wrong, to trust that and to do your own research. Everything I share out, and when I hand these documents to people, I urge them, I said, please don't take my opinion on this to heart. You have a duty to read this, to open these links, to read it for yourself, to see with your own eyes, and to think always. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what this, the technology advances that we have, and it really hurt that when it should have helped us. When I first, for example, I'm on Facebook, when I joined Facebook, I was so disappointed. I wanted to have these conversations with individuals, and it was just attack. And we need to all work very hard at relearning the art of conversation. And that's where we truly learn, and to, conversations like this. So I appreciate that.
So true. Thank you, Bob, for being with us today, for sharing what you have about the party. We wish you every success with the Independence Party, the great work that it's doing, that you're doing. And thanks so much for being our special guest on Grey Matter.
Thank you, Leighton. Thanks for the invitation. All right.